The neon lights of the city gleamed like 1,000 stars, each one a reminder of dreams and possibilities just out of reach. In the heart of the bustling metropolis, where the rich flaunted their wealth and the poor fought for survival, a single mother named Tamara stood on the edge of a decision that would change her life forever. Her hands trembled as she glanced at the envelope in her hand. It was an invitation, but it felt more like a lifeline. A mysterious millionaire had requested her to perform at a private, exclusive event, a chance that could pull her and her young daughter, Zoe, out of the constant struggle they'd been living through. Tamara had never imagined herself in such a situation, but with every passing day, the weight of her responsibilities as a mother pushed her further into a corner. Her job at a local diner barely paid the rent, and the bills kept stacking up. Every day felt like a battle to make ends meet, but Zoe deserved more. At night, after Zoe was asleep, Tamara would sit by the window of their small apartment, staring out at the city lights. The world outside seemed so far removed from the struggles inside her cramped home. But in those quiet moments, Tamara would dream. She dreamt of providing Zoe with the life she deserved, one where she didn't have to worry about how to pay for her next meal, where she could go to school without feeling different, without feeling like the world was closing in on her. Tamara's thoughts often wandered to her own childhood, the moments when her mother, too, had done everything she could to give her a chance. It wasn't enough back then, but maybe, just maybe, this invitation could be her opportunity to turn things around. If she said no, she'd remain stuck in the same cycle of poverty, a cycle that threatened to trap her daughter as well. But if she said yes, she'd have to face a world that she knew nothing about, wealth, power, and a level of luxury she'd only seen on TV. The night of the event arrived faster than she expected. Tamara slipped into the dress she had borrowed from a friend, her heart racing as she stood in front of the mirror. She looked different, almost like someone else. She was nervous, terrified even, but there was something else too, something stronger than the fear. It was the burning desire to give Zoe the future she deserved. The venue was beyond anything Tamara had ever imagined. The mansion sprawled like a palace, with sparkling chandeliers and walls lined with art that spoke of a life that seemed almost too perfect to be real. As she stepped inside, a hush fell over the room. She wasn't like the other women there, graceful, elegant, and confident in their designer gowns. Tamara was just a mother, a woman trying to find a way to make it all work for her daughter. But her presence caught the attention of the guests, and she felt every pair of eyes on her as she walked to the center of the room. The man who had invited her was waiting for her. His name was Carter Hale, a billionaire whose fortune came from a successful tech empire. At first glance, Carter seemed like the kind of man who lived in a different world, a world where money was no object and desires were easily fulfilled. But there was something in his eyes, something that betrayed a quiet loneliness. As they locked eyes for the first time, Tamara felt an instant connection. It was as though, in that brief moment, the entire world faded away. It was just the two of them, standing on the edge of something neither one could predict. Carter had been through his own struggles, though they were far removed from Tamara's. His life had been shaped by ambition, success, and the cold isolation that often accompanied wealth. But there was one thing he had never experienced, someone who could remind him of the things that really mattered. When Tamara walked into the room, there was something raw, something real about her that piqued his curiosity. She was beautiful, but it wasn't just her appearance that drew him in. It was the vulnerability in her eyes, the way she carried herself, like someone who had weathered storms and come out stronger on the other side. The night unfolded in a whirlwind of music, laughter, and champagne. But Tamara's thoughts were elsewhere. The performance she had agreed to give, dance, something she had once loved, but now had been reduced to a means of survival, loomed before her. She had danced in clubs before, but this was different. The stakes were higher, and Carter was watching her. His gaze never left her. As the music began, Tamara closed her eyes for a brief moment, took a deep breath, and allowed herself to become lost in the rhythm. She didn't do it for the money. She didn't do it for the rich man in the front row. She did it because, for the first time in a long while, she felt free. The music enveloped her, and as her body moved, she could almost forget the weight of the world. She could almost forget the years of struggle, the nights she lay awake, wondering how she could make it all work. Carter watched, transfixed, as Tamara moved. It wasn't just her physical grace, but the emotion behind every movement. There was a depth to her dance that he had never seen before. He saw in her a rawness, a truth that was unlike anything in his own life. Every twist, every turn of her body seemed to speak to him in a language he didn't know, but understood deeply. It was as if, in those fleeting moments, she was telling him her story, the story of sacrifice, of dreams, and of a love that could overcome any obstacle. When the music came to an end, there was silence in the room. The guests were frozen, caught up in the spell of her performance. And then, as though waking from a dream, they erupted into applause. But it was Carter's reaction that Tamara couldn't forget. His eyes were filled with something she couldn't quite name, something that was both longing and admiration. But what Tamara didn't know, as she caught her breath and took a step back, was that this moment was only the beginning. Carter was intrigued, yes, but there was more at play. He had fallen for her in a way he didn't understand, and it would take more than just a dance to unravel the emotions stirring inside him. As Tamara glanced at him across the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Was this the opportunity she'd been waiting for? Or was it the start of something far more complicated than she could ever imagine? The night wasn't over yet, and neither was their story. The weeks that followed Tamara's performance felt like a blur. The night at the mansion had set off a chain of events that she wasn't prepared for. She had danced for Carter Hale, and in return, he'd offered her more than just applause. He'd offered her a glimpse into a world she never thought possible. Luxury, power, and opportunity. But with that came something she didn't know how to handle. His interest in her. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Carter sent her flowers, expensive bouquets that seemed to take up her whole living room, and little gifts for Zoe, who adored the stuffed animals that arrived each week. There was nothing particularly out of place. It wasn't like he was pressuring her. It felt like he was trying to be a gentleman, even though his world felt like another planet to Tamara. But as the days went on, things started to feel different. Carter didn't just want to know about her dance or the performance. He wanted to know about her life, her struggles, the moments that shaped her into the person she was today. At first, Tamara hesitated. She had always kept her heart guarded. Being a single mother had forced her to build walls around herself. She didn't trust easily, but Carter's persistence wore her down. There was something in his voice that made her feel like she could open up, something that made her believe he really cared. Tamara told him about Zoe's father, who had disappeared the moment she found out she was pregnant. She spoke of the long hours she worked to provide for her daughter, of the sacrifices she made to ensure Zoe had a good life, despite the odds stacked against them. It wasn't easy, but there was comfort in sharing her story with someone who seemed to understand. She hadn't had that kind of connection in a long time. But with each conversation, with each shared moment of vulnerability, Tamara began to feel the weight of something else. expectations. Carter had done more for her than anyone ever had. He'd opened doors, introduced her to people who could change her life, and offered to help in ways that made her uncomfortable. Every time he smiled at her or called her, it felt like there was more to his intentions than just friendship. She could sense it, his attraction, his desire to get closer to her. But could she really trust him? Was it genuine? Or was he just another rich man who saw her as a way to satisfy his curiosity, a temporary distraction from his perfect, polished life? For a moment, there was only quiet on the other end of the line, and then Carter's voice softened, like a man who had just realized something important. "I understand," he said, "but know this, Tamara. I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to trust me, to take a step forward, together, you and me. We both have our battles, but maybe, just maybe, we can fight them side by side." Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the invitation to his estate anymore. It wasn't just about escaping her life for a weekend. It was about him, about the possibility of something real, something meaningful. But could she really trust him? Could she trust herself? "I'll go," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. The decision was made, but in the pit of her stomach, a knot tightened. There was no turning back now. The weekend at Carter's estate was everything she could have imagined and more. The sprawling mansion, the lush gardens, the private beach. Tamara felt like she was living in a dream. But with each passing hour, the dream began to feel more like a carefully constructed illusion. Carter was kind, generous, and attentive, but there was something lurking beneath the surface. She could see it in the way he watched her, the way he seemed to expect her to fit into a world she wasn't sure she belonged in. It was on the second night that everything changed. They were sitting outside on the patio, the moonlight reflecting off the water as they talked. The conversation had drifted to their pasts, to the lives they had built, and the lives they had left behind. "I've never been honest with you, Tamara," Carter said, his voice low and hesitant. "I don't just want to share this world with you. I want to share my life. I want to build something real with you." Tamara looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked, unsure whether she wanted to hear the answer. "I'm not the man I've let you believe I am," he admitted. "I've made mistakes, been blinded by ambition, by my need to control everything. But when I saw you, when I saw how strong you are, how fiercely you love your daughter, I realized what I've been missing all this time. I want to give you more than just this lifestyle, Tamara. I want to give you my heart. I want us to build something together." For a moment, Tamara didn't know how to respond. His words felt like a confession, a revelation that shook her to her core. But the shock of it all couldn't drown out the voice inside her, the voice that had been telling her all along that there was more to this than just the surface-level attraction. Carter was vulnerable too. He wasn't the perfect, untouchable millionaire she had once thought him to be. He had his own scars, his own fears. And in that moment, as they sat together under the stars, Tamara realized something. She wasn't the only one taking a risk. "Carter," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't know if I can trust you completely yet, but I can't deny what I feel either." Carter reached for her hand, his touch gentle, as though afraid to break the fragile bond they were forming. "Then let's take it slow," he said. "Let's figure this out, one step at a time, together." Tamara took a deep breath. She had never been one to rush into anything, especially when it came to matters of the heart, but she also knew that life was too short to ignore what was right in front of her. She had spent years fighting for survival, for her daughter's future. Maybe it was time to allow herself a chance at happiness too. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet. moments, long walks on the beach, intimate dinners, and heart-to-heart conversations that stripped away the walls they had both built around themselves. And by the time Tamara returned to her apartment, she realized something crucial. It wasn't about the mansion, the luxury, or the wealth. It was about the connection they had forged, the trust they had begun to build, and the promise of something deeper. Back home, Tamara sat on her couch. Zoe curled up next to her as they watched TV. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Her life wasn't perfect, but she was learning to embrace it for what it was. And when Carter called the next day, his voice warm and familiar, Tamara knew she was ready to take that next step with him. Slowly but surely. Their journey wasn't going to be easy. There would be obstacles, challenges, and moments of doubt, but they both understood one thing now. Life was about more than just surviving. It was about living, about loving, about taking chances. And for Tamara, the future was no longer something she had to face alone. As for Zoe, she was already growing, up in a home filled with love and possibility. And that, Tamara knew, was the greatest gift she could give her daughter. In the end, it wasn't about the rich man who had fallen in love with her. It was about finding the courage to trust, to love, and to take a chance on a life she never thought was possible. And in doing so, Tamara discovered that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards.